The vastness of the galaxy was a place of order. Civilizations rose and fell in an intricate dance of diplomacy and power. No one had ever questioned the supremacy of the Galactic Alliance, an imposing coalition of species that had mastered technology and warfare to a degree no other could imagine. Yet out of the blackness of space, something new had arrived, a presence like no other. The fleet of unknown ships that appeared on the outer rim of known space was like nothing anyone had ever seen. Their hulls were rough, almost crude-looking compared to the sleek, perfectly engineered vessels of the Alliance. At first, the Council dismissed them as insignificant, an anomaly, a fluke. They believed they had nothing to fear from such a primitive-looking force. Yet the moment the unknown ships fired their first shot, their disbelief turned to terror. In an instant, their weapons, though simple in appearance, were devastating. Their energy cannons tearing through the battle lines of the Alliance's first fleet with a force that left no time for countermeasures or retreat. The first engagement was over in minutes. The humans, as they would later be called, had destroyed an entire battle group without losing a single vessel of their own. The Alliance's leadership was in shock. How could this be? How had these humans so easily crippled their most elite forces? The tactical committee scrambled to make sense of the onslaught. Their records showed no species in the galaxy capable of such raw destructive power. Not only had the humans done the impossible, they had done so without any clear strategy or coordination. Their ships appeared disorganized and chaotic in design, yet they fought with a ferocity that defied logic. The fleet didn't follow any recognizable patterns of warfare. They weren't using military protocols the way the Alliance's forces were taught. No, the humans were unpredictable, they were reckless. But it worked. The next day, the Alliance dispatched their best commanders and analysts to study the Terran technology and the tactics of their fleet. The Terrans had arrived from an uncharted star system, and while their vessels looked antiquated, they were able to withstand hits that would destroy any other ship with seemingly no consequences. The analysts couldn't even figure out the composition of the ship's hulls. Their materials didn't match any alloys in the Alliance's database, and their energy shields were unlike any known technology. But it was the human combat style that truly set them apart. Their warships seemed to thrive on confusion. Their unpredictable maneuvers baffled the Alliance fleet. Every time they thought they had the upper hand, the Terrans would break off their formation, charging straight into the heart of the enemy in a suicidal move, only to reveal it was all part of a larger plan. Their firepower was overwhelming, their adaptability unmatched. The Alliance's pride in its strategic dominance began to erode as every attempt to outthink the humans turned into another crushing defeat. The galaxy's finest minds could only watch in disbelief as Terran warships shattered their assumptions about the nature of war and warfare itself. There was one undeniable truth they couldn't ignore: the Terrans had arrived, and they had brought with them an arsenal no one had ever seen before, a raw, unfiltered force that defied all expectations, and soon the entire galaxy would have to reckon with the Terran way of war. The Alliance's top tacticians were reeling from the first devastating defeat at the hands of the Terrans. They had underestimated humanity, believing they could easily overcome these seemingly primitive vessels. But now that belief was shattered, and panic began to seep into the ranks of the Alliance's high command, desperate to understand how the Terrans were able to strike with such overwhelming force and yet display no predictable strategy. The Alliance called in their brightest minds to study the Terran warships. Every available resource was funneled into gathering intelligence on the humans, yet every attempt to analyze their tactics only led to further confusion. It was clear that Terran vessels did not follow any known battle doctrine. Their movements were erratic but purposeful, their attacks unpredictable but devastating. Their warships often appeared to be flailing in combat, taking risks that no seasoned commander would ever consider. In an effort to study this anomaly, a fleet of the Alliance's most experienced officers was sent to engage the Terrans directly, but what they encountered was nothing short of baffling. The humans didn't seem interested in any form of conventional engagement. Instead of facing them head-on, they circled around them, weaving in and out of their sights in a disorienting pattern. A handful of Terran warships appeared to retreat, but instead of fleeing, they lured their pursuers into a trap where they quickly turned on them with sheer ferocity. An Alliance flagship was caught off guard as a small Terran vessel launched a surprise attack that disabled their primary weapons. Before vanishing into the chaos, the Alliance forces were left unable to recover, unable to comprehend how this had happened. It was a loss of strategy so far removed from anything they'd known. The Alliance had expected careful planning and perfect precision, but what they received was chaos and resilience, combined a storm that could not be predicted. No matter how many simulations they ran, the Terran fleet's actions could not be recreated by any of their models. The ships seemed to act on instinct and experience. Rather than strict orders, they didn't follow the rules, they bent them to their will. It wasn't just the technology that was baffling, it was the very heart of the Terran fleet. Their way of war was so different, it became a new standard of unpredictability. The more the Alliance attempted to learn and adapt, the more they found themselves outwitted by the sheer ingenuity of the humans. It was as if the Terrans had no fear of failure. Every ship in their fleet was a self-sustaining unit with one simple purpose: survive and destroy at any cost. What they lacked in numbers, they made up for in raw power and an ability to improvise under extreme pressure. There were no predictable formations, no rigid tactics. Each battle was unique, and each human ship appeared to follow its own course, even though they were all connected by a single unified goal, a ruthless and unrelenting desire to win. When a fleet of the Alliance's most powerful ships attempted to form a blockade around the Terran forces, their formation was shattered by a single Terran warship, which used a tactic that defied all known principles of space warfare. The ship didn't just attack, it caused its enemies to hesitate by targeting their weaknesses, not their shields, not their weapons, but their command and coordination, throwing the Alliance into disarray for hours. It was a move that defied logic and left the Alliance grasping for answers at every turn. The warships the Terrans employed weren't just vessels, they were instruments of war designed to adapt to any challenge. The humans were making their own rules, and the galaxy was starting to realize that no one was prepared for the consequences. The Alliance was now in a state of full-scale panic. The Terrans had broken their carefully crafted strategies over and over again. With every engagement, the humans seemed to grow more audacious, more unhinged, but their victories piled up, and there was nothing the Alliance could do to stop them. It wasn't just the human warships' resilience that was so confounding, it was the way they seemed to always be one step ahead of every move the Alliance made. No matter how clever the tactics were, no matter how perfectly executed the Alliance's fleets were, they always seemed to fall into the Terrans' hands. And in every battle, the humans found new ways to exploit weaknesses that hadn't even been noticed until it was too late. The most experienced generals and fleet commanders were now on edge, unable to predict the Terran counterattacks, and unwilling to waste any more ships on what they were beginning to believe was an unwinnable conflict. A notable moment came when a fleet of 10 of the Alliance's finest warships was deployed to engage a small group of Terran vessels thought to be damaged beyond recovery. The Alliance was confident that this would be the perfect time to strike down the Terrans once and for all, but when they approached the fleet of seemingly disabled ships, something happened that no one could have expected. The Terran ships, which were supposed to be inoperable, had somehow repaired themselves in an astonishingly short amount of time, and launched an immediate counterattack with such precision and force that it took less than an hour for the Alliance to lose half of their fleet. The Terrans hadn't just repaired their ships, they had modified them mid-battle, tweaking their systems, using the very debris of the wrecked Alliance vessels to reinforce their hulls and adapt their weapon systems. The Alliance commanders were left in disbelief as they tried to figure out how they had missed such a simple yet effective tactic. The humans didn't just fight, they found ways to turn their enemies' mistakes into advantages. The warships were equipped with makeshift systems that could be changed and improved on the fly. The Terrans didn't need perfect technology, they needed to be resourceful, and that was something the Alliance hadn't accounted for. As the war stretched on, the Terran fleet only grew stronger. The more the Alliance attempted to counter the unpredictable nature of the humans, the more the Alliance's forces crumbled under the weight of constant rethinking and improvisation. The Alliance's best minds studied the wreckage of the Terran ships after each battle, but no matter how many times they observed the remnants of a destroyed Terran warship, they could never quite figure out what made them so deadly. They had no single point of weakness, no obvious flaw, no pattern of behavior to exploit. The only thing the analysts were sure of was that the humans didn't fight like anyone else. They didn't care for perfection or efficiency. They cared only for survival and victory at any cost. And so the Terrans began to build upon their successes, using the wreckage of destroyed ships to create new weapons and new tactics, always moving forward, always adapting. And it wasn't just the warships that baffled the Alliance. It was the way the humans fought. It was relentless. It was raw. It was pure willpower driving them. And the galaxy began to see that this wasn't a war against technology. It was a war against the indomitable spirit of humanity. As the war continued and the Alliance's top commanders were left scrambling for solutions, the Terrans began to take on a reputation not just for their relentless nature, but for the very spirit that drove them. It was clear now that humanity didn't fight like anyone else. They fought with everything they had, but there was something more at play, something the Alliance couldn't grasp. It wasn't just the superior adaptability of their technology or their innovative combat strategies. It was the unshakable resolve of the Terran people themselves. No matter the odds, no matter the damage inflicted, they simply would not stop. Their warships were not just tools of destruction. They were a reflection of their people, their tenacity, and their will to survive against any force in the galaxy. The Alliance had prided itself on its well-oiled political unity and its technological advancements, but nothing had prepared them for a force that fought not with calculated precision, but with something far deeper and more dangerous, a thirst for survival, rooted in every individual human that inhabited the fleet. And this realization struck the Alliance like a bolt from the blue. When the Terran General was broadcasted across all frequencies to the galaxy, the broadcast was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. A simple man standing on the deck of a ship overlooking a battle-scarred world behind him, his uniform battered, but his eyes fierce. With resolve, his voice rang out across the stars as he spoke of humanity's past, how they had risen from a planet torn by conflict and divided by nations, yet they had survived, they had adapted, they had learned to fight through every challenge. No matter how impossible the odds, when humanity faced extinction, they rose from the ashes and fought back with a force that no one could contain. The general didn't speak of grand military strategies or advanced technology. He didn't speak of alliances or politics. He spoke of the human heart and the unyielding nature that defined his people. That moment was a turning point in the war. The Alliance had never seen anything like it. No species had ever been able to match the sheer willpower of humanity. When the Alliance leaders heard the words of the Terran General, their arrogance began to fade and fear crept into their hearts. They realized this was no longer a war they could win through technology alone. The Terrans weren't fighting for conquest or glory. They were fighting for survival. And that was a force far more dangerous than any fleet or weapon the Alliance possessed. The broadcast had an impact far beyond the battlefield. It wasn't just the soldiers who heard those words, it was every citizen of the galaxy. Suddenly, the Terrans were not just a threat to be neutralized. They were something else, something almost mythical. They were the embodiment of a species that refused to bow to fate. And the Alliance began to realize that the Terrans were unlike anything they had ever encountered, and they would not be easy to defeat. As the war raged on, the Alliance started to see that even if their ships could outgun the Terrans, their resolve would always win out. The humans fought not for the stars, not for power, not for glory, but for the future of their kind. And that gave them an edge no fleet could match. The war was no longer just a military conflict. It was a battle of wills, and humanity's was stronger than any the galaxy had ever known. The broadcast from the Terran General had sent ripples through the galaxy, but the Alliance was not ready to admit defeat. The leaders of the coalition gathered once more to discuss their next steps. Their pride, their power had been shaken, and they were unwilling to let the Terrans undo millennia of dominance. Through sheer willpower alone, it was clear now that this war was unlike anything the Alliance had ever fought before. There was no easy way to stop humanity's advance, so they resorted to the one tactic they believed could break the Terrans once and for all: psychological warfare. They launched a full-scale disinformation campaign designed to strike at the heart of humanity's resolve. They spread rumors of a great plague sweeping through Terran colonies. They fabricated reports of widespread famine and collapse within human-controlled sectors. But no matter what they threw at the humans, they never wavered. Their communication channels were flooded with propaganda, and yet the Terran warships kept coming. The Alliance fleet regrouped for a final strike, a massive coordinated assault. They planned to encircle and crush the humans with the combined might of every member species in the coalition. They would overwhelm the Terran forces and break their morale once and for all, or so they thought. The battle began with overwhelming force. But something unexpected happened. The Terran fleet didn't cower in the face of this massive onslaught. They didn't retreat. They charged with renewed vigor, the very thing the Alliance had hoped to exploit. The humans' supposed desperation became their greatest weapon. The Terran fleet's tactics were even more audacious than before. They had no set formations, no rigid lines, no focus on defense. They fought with abandon, their movements fluid and chaotic. Every ship appeared to be acting independently, yet they were all working together in an intricate dance of aggression and ferocity. The Alliance was caught off guard as Terran vessels launched attack after attack. With no clear rhyme or reason, they struck at weak points in the Alliance's defenses, exploiting any vulnerability they could find, even at the cost of their own ships. And it worked for the first time in months. The Alliance fleet faltered. They didn't know how to respond to the unpredictability of the Terran assault. It was madness, but it was effective. Every ship was a living weapon, fighting with a single purpose: to break the enemy, no matter the cost. And then came the surprise. The Terran ships revealed a new weapon, a technology unlike anything the Alliance had ever encountered. They deployed energy pulses that disrupted the Alliance's shields and weapon systems, temporarily rendering their advanced technology useless for brief but critical moments. It wasn't a devastating weapon, but it was enough to throw the Alliance into complete disarray. The humans had struck again, not with a perfect weapon, but with a simple tool designed to exploit a weakness. The Alliance never thought to protect their technology was advanced beyond comprehension, but the Terrans didn't care about sophistication. They didn't need perfect systems. They needed to break what worked for the enemy. And once again, the Alliance's forces were thrown into chaos as the battle raged on. The Terrans refused to give an inch. They fought as if the very fate of their species depended on it. And maybe it did. The Alliance began to see the truth of the matter. No matter how superior their technology or resources were, they could not match the strength of human resilience. Every move they made was countered with an equal and opposite response from the Terrans. It was clear now that this war wasn't just about winning, it was about survival, and the Terrans had made it their fight to win. With each passing day, the Alliance's confidence eroded. The Terrans refused to be broken. They had not only withstood every assault, but had managed to turn each one into a victory of their own. And the galaxy began to watch as the underdog species reshaped the very nature of warfare. Their resilience, their adaptability, their cunning had become a legend, but the Alliance could not afford to back down. They had put everything into this conflict, and defeat was not an option. No matter the cost, they began to change their approach. They called upon the highest echelons of their military minds from across the galaxy to develop a plan that could finally neutralize the Terran threat. They had to end this war quickly and decisively, or risk losing everything. The new plan was a risky one. It involved luring the Terran fleet into a trap that would take advantage of their unpredictability and turn it into their downfall. The Alliance combined their most advanced technologies and tactics to create a force that could isolate and overwhelm the human ships in a way they hadn't experienced before. They would use the very chaos that the Terrans thrived in against them. The Alliance formed a massive fleet of diverse species, all equipped with cutting-edge stealth technology and coordinated strikes designed to disorient the Terran ships into making fatal mistakes. Their forces were scattered across the system in preparation for a strike that would encircle the Terrans from all sides, catching them in a pincer that would leave no escape. They had studied the human fleet closely. They knew how they moved, how they fought. And this time, they would not fall into their traps. They would not let the Terrans improvise their way to victory. But when the battle began, the Alliance learned the hardest lesson of all. The Terrans had been watching, and learning too. What they saw was a perfect opportunity to turn the Alliance's own strengths against them. The Alliance fleet had believed their superior stealth technology would give them the upper hand, but the Terrans had already anticipated this move. Their warships didn't follow the predicted patterns of behavior. The Alliance had studied. They instead scattered their fleet into smaller groups, each one using simple but highly effective countermeasures to neutralize the Alliance's advantages with lightning speed. They began to dismantle the trap piece by piece. The Terrans used their unparalleled coordination to strike at the Alliance's weak points, picking off ships. One by one, their actions were frantic, unpredictable, but brutally effective. The Alliance was once again thrust into a situation they couldn't control, and soon their own perfect plan unraveled in front of them. The Terrans didn't just defeat the Alliance's fleet, they humiliated it. Their ability to break apart the intricate trap and turn it into their own victory proved something to the galaxy, that the Terrans were not just survivors, they were masters of chaos. They didn't need the perfect strategy or technology. They only needed the freedom to act without restraint. The humans had now shown the galaxy that no matter the odds, no matter the numbers, no matter the strength of the enemy, they would always find a way to fight back. And when the Alliance was left shaken not just by the results of the battle, but by the fact that no matter how much they learned about the Terrans, no matter how they adapted, they would always be a step behind. The humans had redefined the rules of war once again, and the galaxy was now forced to come to terms with one undeniable truth: the Terrans were a force unlike any other. The defeat of the Alliance's grand strategy sent shockwaves across the galaxy, and a grim realization set in among the Coalition's leadership. The Terrans were no longer a nuisance to be swept away. They had become the single greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced. But even more disturbing was the growing belief that no matter what the Alliance did, no matter how they restructured their fleets or upgraded their technology, they could not seem to anticipate the Terrans' next move. The humans were playing a game no one else knew the rules to, and the galaxy's most advanced civilizations had no way of countering it. The defeat ignited a deeper sense of urgency within the Alliance. They began to push their resources into experimental technologies and secret weapon development. But the more they tried to adapt, the more they seemed to fall behind. The Terrans didn't just keep up with their new strategies, they accelerated their own advancements. And soon rumors began circulating of humanity's most shocking revelation. Yet the Terrans had discovered a way to harness the very fabric of space-time itself. Rumors of their new weapon spread like wildfire. The humans had reportedly unlocked the ability to create rifts in space that could bend the laws of physics and time, twisting the battlefield itself to their advantage. These rifts allowed them to move vast distances in the blink of an eye, appearing behind enemy lines or evading pursuit with terrifying precision. The Terrans had turned the very concept of space warfare upside down. But it wasn't just the technology that caused panic among the Alliance. It was the philosophy behind it. The Terrans weren't using these new abilities for destruction alone. They used them for survival and flexibility. With this power, they could respond to threats faster than any fleet could react. They could shift the battlefield into their favor before the Alliance could even see it coming. The ability to manipulate spacetime was more than just a new weapon. It was a paradigm shift. It meant that the humans were no longer constrained by the physical limits that defined traditional warfare. They could essentially erase the concept of distance and time from the equation, and that rendered the Alliance's most advanced tactics and strategies obsolete. As the rumors solidified into truth, the Alliance scrambled to understand this new capability and develop a response. But the Terrans had already gained an edge that no technology, no amount of force, could counter. The Galactic Coalition was losing the war, but they still couldn't bring themselves to concede. They called for an emergency summit bringing together the most powerful species in the galaxy to finally address the Terran threat. It was here that the true weight of the situation became clear. This wasn't just a military conflict anymore. This was a war for the future of the galaxy. The leaders of the Alliance were faced with a harsh truth: if the Terrans succeeded, there would be no room left for the established powers of the galaxy. The Alliance had prided itself on centuries of stability and control, but now a single species, one that defied every known law of warfare, was threatening that very existence. It wasn't just about defeating the Terrans anymore. It was about preserving the order that had existed for eons. But despite all their planning and preparation, the Alliance could not stop the inevitable. The humans' relentless innovation continued to outpace every attempt to stop them, and in doing so they proved something even more terrifying: They were not merely fighting for territory or dominance. They were fighting for the right to rewrite the rules of the galaxy itself. The summit of the Alliance's leaders was a tense affair. The representatives of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations sat in silence as they reviewed their strategies, their plans, their hopes and fears. But as the minutes passed, it became clear to all that the Terran threat was unlike anything they had ever faced. The humans had cracked open the very foundation of warfare itself. And now they held a power no one could replicate or match. The galaxy's leaders were faced with a grim reality. No matter what the Alliance did, there was no way to stop the Terrans' march forward. The Terran warships had grown unstoppable. Their ability to bend spacetime and adapt on the fly meant that every strategy the Alliance employed was rendered obsolete before it even began. The idea of fighting back had become a mere fantasy, and the fear of complete annihilation was slowly creeping into the minds of the galaxy's most seasoned leaders. But the Terrans had something else on their side that the Alliance couldn't ignore. Humanity had a drive and unity that transcended military might. It was a thirst for survival, a will to endure no matter the cost. The summit's tone shifted when an unexpected voice broke through the discussions, a voice that was calm yet carried the weight of an entire species. The Terran general who had broadcasted his message months earlier appeared once again on every screen across the galaxy. This time, however, his message wasn't one of defiance or aggression. It was an invitation, an offer to negotiate. The general's voice echoed through the silence of the summit. "We are not here to conquer you," he said. "We are here to ensure our survival, and the survival of all those who are willing to understand the cost of peace." The room was silent as the message resonated. The Terran fleet had been crushing the Alliance not out of a desire for domination or revenge, but out of a need to preserve themselves. Humanity's message was clear. If the Alliance wanted to avoid total destruction, they would have to understand that the galaxy was no longer theirs to control. Humanity had fought to defend its very existence and would not stop until the galaxy had been reshaped according to the laws of survival rather than conquest. The summit's leaders had a choice to make: accept the new reality and work with the Terrans, or continue to fight and face an inevitable defeat. The debate raged for days, but in the end, the truth was undeniable. The Terrans had proven themselves unstoppable, not just because of their superior technology or warfare, but because they had tapped into something that the Alliance had long forgotten: the will to fight for the future of their people. The galaxy had been held in a delicate balance for centuries, but now, in the face of the Terran onslaught, that balance was shifting, and there was no going back. Humanity had emerged not as a conqueror, but as a force of nature too powerful to ignore. And as the Alliance finally began to acknowledge the reality of the Terran ascent, they realized the war was not just over. It had transformed the galaxy forever. No longer could the established powers dictate the fate of others. The Terrans had shown the galaxy that survival was not a privilege for the powerful. It was the right of every species to fight for its place in the stars. The new era had begun, and there was no room for complacency. Humanity had proven that they were a force to be reckoned with, and from now on the galaxy would have to reckon with them too.